Listen carefully. Stop for a moment. Before you decide anything, watch this. This story didn't start today. It didn't begin with headlines, charts, or applause. Something here doesn't add up because this milestone was never planned, never announced, and never assigned to him. And yet, it happened. Pay attention to what happened next because this part matters. Don't miss this detail. What you're about to hear changes everything. When people talk about Jungkook, they talk about talent, numbers, and popularity. What they rarely talk about is how he reached moments that were never meant for him and who stood beside him when it happened. Focus on this part and look closely. From the beginning, expectations were clear. Roles were defined and paths were outlined. Some members were expected to lead, some to carry the sound, some to represent stability. Jungkook was always known as talented, but milestones like this were never written with his name in mind. Here, what most people overlooked. This wasn't about competition, spotlight, or outperforming anyone. This was about timing, pressure, and growth that happened quietly. This wasn't a coincidence. While the world watched the results, what mattered happened behind the scenes. Long hours, unspoken pressure, and expectations that were never said out loud but always felt. Through all of it, there was one constant presence. Jimin, not as a headline or a symbol, but as someone who shared the weight when the weight wasn't visible. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. This milestone didn't arrive with fireworks or certainty. It came during doubt, silence, and moments when nothing felt guaranteed. Sit with that for a second. Think about this carefully. But that wasn't the end. What came next changed the direction. This is where it turns. Because once expectations begin to shift, pressure doesn't disappear. It multiplies. That's when everything shifted. This is where the pressure built. The criticism didn't stop. It only changed its shape. Silence became louder than words. Doubt started to take over, not just from the outside, but from within. Questions had no answers, and standards kept moving. Every step forward came with the fear of falling behind. Still, there was no announcement saying this was his milestone. No confirmation and no reassurance. Only work, trust, and endurance. And beside him was someone not pushing, not pulling, but staying. Jimin didn't need to speak loudly or lead the moment. He shared it. This is the moment everything changed. Not because the world noticed, but because they did. Something clicked. Fear stopped controlling the pace and doubt loosened its grip. Nothing was the same after this. There was no going back because once a milestone is crossed, even unintentionally, it rewrites what's possible. And this one was crossed together. Now everything makes sense. This explains why it ended this way. The growth didn't feel forced and the success didn't feel sudden because it was. The truth finally caught up. This milestone wasn't assigned, predicted, or prepared for. It was earned through trust, presence, and standing beside someone when the outcome was uncertain. The truth didn't need noise. It only needed time. And that was enough, because some milestones aren't meant to be set. They're meant to be reached, quietly, together. And what many people still don't realize is this. Milestones don't always arrive as victories. Sometimes they arrive disguised as pressure. Sometimes they show up when someone is already exhausted, already doubting, already questioning whether they are doing enough. That's when they matter most. For Jungkook, growth never followed a straight line. It moved quietly, unevenly, sometimes invisibly. While attention shifted elsewhere, while expectations focused on other narratives, he kept showing up. Not louder, not flashier, just more consistent. That kind of growth is easy to miss, but impossible to erase. And beside him, that consistency was mirrored. Jimin understood something few people talk about. That strength doesn't always come from confidence. Sometimes it comes from staying when leaving would be easier, from sharing silence instead of filling it, from understanding pressure without needing it explained. There were moments when neither of them needed words. Long days where effort went unnoticed. Nights when results didn't match the work. Those are the moments that test people the most. Not the stages, not the applause, but the waiting, the uncertainty, the invisible hours that never make headlines. This is why this milestone matters, because it wasn't reached at the peak of certainty. It was reached in the middle of endurance, while questions lingered, while expectations shifted, while nothing felt secure. That's not luck. That's resilience. Pause and think about how rare that is. In an industry built on constant evaluation, being able to grow without losing balance is not common. Doing it while staying connected to someone who understands the same pressure makes it even rarer. That connection became an anchor, not a spotlight. As time passed, something subtle began to change. Not in numbers, not in charts, but in presence. Jungkook moved with less hesitation. Jimin moved with quieter confidence. It wasn't dramatic, it was steady, and that steadiness started to compound. People often ask when success begins. They look for a moment, a performance, a turning point they can point to. But the truth is, success usually starts long before it's visible. It starts when doubt no longer decides the next step, when fear stops setting the pace. That's exactly what happened here. Not overnight, not suddenly, but gradually, one decision at a time, one shared moment of trust after another, until one day they were standing inside a milestone no one had prepared for them. And when it happened, there was no announcement, no declaration, just realization. Looking back and understanding that something had shifted without permission, that the limit people assumed existed had quietly disappeared. This is where perspective changes, because milestones like this don't separate people. They reveal them. They show who stayed grounded, who carried weight without needing credit, who understood that standing beside someone can matter as much as leading. Jimin didn't frame this moment. He didn't claim it. He didn't need to. His presence was already written into it, not as a headline, but as part of the foundation. The kind you only notice when you realize nothing collapsed. And Jungkook didn't chase this milestone. He didn't announce ambition. He simply continued learning, continued refining, continued trusting the process, even when the process offered no guarantees. That's why this moment feels different, because it doesn't feel claimed. It feels discovered, like arriving somewhere you didn't know you were heading, only to realize you were ready when you got there. Now look at the bigger picture. This milestone didn't isolate Jungkook. It didn't pull him away. It placed him exactly where he had been building toward, even without knowing it, beside someone who understood the journey, not just the result. And that changes how we understand success. It's not always about surpassing others. Sometimes it's about surpassing a version of yourself that once doubted whether this was possible, and doing that with someone who remembers those doubts with you. As time moves forward, people will talk about achievements. They'll point to moments, numbers, and outcomes, but they may miss the quiet truth behind this one, that it wasn't forced, it wasn't demanded, it wasn't rushed. It was allowed to happen. And that's why it lasts. Because milestones set by expectation can fade, but milestones reached through trust tend to hold. They become reference points, not for comparison, but for confidence. Proof that growth doesn't always need permission. The truth didn't need explanation. It didn't need defense. It didn't need noise. It only needed time to reveal itself. And when it did, it showed something simple. Some milestones aren't given. They aren't planned. They aren't announced. And this is the moment it becomes clear. Not when the world reacted, not when the numbers appeared, but when it was impossible to ignore what had already happened. This milestone was never announced, never promised, and never designed for him. Yet he stepped into it anyway, not by force, but by consistency. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic declaration, just the quiet realization that the limits people assumed were gone. Jungkook didn't cross this milestone by chasing it. He crossed it by staying, by growing, and by trusting the process when the process gave him nothing in return. And beside him was Jimin, not pulling him forward, not pushing him ahead, but standing close enough to share the weight when it mattered most. That presence changed everything, because some moments aren't about who arrives first, they're about who stays until the end. This is why this milestone feels different. It doesn't separate them, it binds them. It proves that growth doesn't always need permission, and success doesn't always need noise. Sometimes, all it needs is time, trust, and someone who understands the silence. That's when it happened. Not as a headline, not as a spectacle, but as a fact. A line quietly crossed. A standard quietly rewritten. And from that moment on, there was no debate left, no doubt left, no limit left.